This is American Adventure, a study of man in the New World, his values and characteristics. Written by John Ehle, directed by John Clayton, American Adventure is produced by the Communications Center of the University of North Carolina. Earl Wynn, director. Tonight's program is about the famous American Cyrus Field, and is the story of his efforts to lay the Atlantic cable and tie together two continents.
July 23rd, 1865, and the British liner Great Eastern lay with steam up but engine silent off Valentia, Ireland. In her hold, she carried 7,000 tons of submarine telegraph cable and a full supply of coal and food for her long, strange voyage to Newfoundland. The meat supply was, of course, largely alive, but there was hardly a sound from the 500 chickens, 10 bullocks, 1 milk cow, 114 sheep, 20 pigs, 29 geese, and 14 turkeys. Even the animals seemed to have taken on the tension held by the crewmen who stood without speaking, who watched tensely, waited nervously for the beginning of the vast enterprise, the laying of the Atlantic cable. Only one man moved confidently, a man with a beard. He stepped out of the main salon as if he hadn't a care in the world.
Coffee too cold, but it was a fair breakfast, Seth.
Coffee was steaming, Mr. Field.
Good morning, sailor.
Morning, sir.
He was well known, this man, internationally famous for his failures. One of the most dedicated salesmen of all time. Cyrus, the great Cyrus, the American, Cyrus Field.
Got the cable spliced to the shore end yet, Mr. Field?
I think so, Captain Anderson.
Well, then, anything you want to say before we begin laying the cable again?
No, thank you. No speeches for me.
I'm nervous. Are you?
Oh, things could hardly be better planned than they are, Captain. Cable's been repeatedly checked, machinery's in good
Cyrus,
working...
why don't you say a word of prayer before we start?
I've prayed about this so much, Captain, that I don't think...
Helmsman? Sir? Mr. Cyrus Field will now lead us in a word of prayer.
Aye, sir.
Lord, here we are, floating out on the ocean once more, trying to do something which many reasonable men say cannot be done, and looking to you for help in doing it. Now, Captain Anderson and I have come to you concerning this Atlantic cable before, and you didn't see fit to favor us then. And we've looked to ourselves to see what the fault might be. And we've found many faults, and no reason for you to help us. But there are reasons outside Captain Anderson and Mr. Canning and these men and me. We aim to connect two continents with instant communication because we believe better understanding will come between men. Now, if this is a cause which interests you in our behalf, we pledge to give you the glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 No doubt about it, Mr. Field.
About what, Captain?
Oh, you're in practice.
There were men in both Europe and America who said that the Atlantic cable could not be laid. At the speed of the ship, the speed at which the cable was unwound, and the depth of the ocean would at some point lose synchronization, so that the cable would be ripped apart. And the cable itself had to be perfect. The weather had to be good. Oh, there were many reasons why it could not be done.
Say there, Mr. Canning. How's it going?
Everything well. Cable's going through the machinery smoothly.
Has the instrument room reported?
Yes, sir. They're in continuous contact with the island station through the entire length of the cable. If anything happens, they'll know about it soon enough.
It's a beautiful sound, isn't it?
What's that?
The cable. It's a beautiful cable, Mr. Canning. My wife says I'm in love with the Atlantic cable.
pass the rolls, Mr. Field?
Of course.
This is a right nice supper, Seth.
Men are about to go blind looking at that cable up there, and this is the first day.
What's your speed, Captain?
Started at 3 knots, but we're up to 6.5 now. That'll probably be the peak.
Yes, we can't play out cable faster than that.
How did you ever get into the cable laying business anyway, Cyrus?
Oh, stumbled in, I reckon.
Must have had some reason. Sure isn't any pleasure to be in it.
Oh, I suppose I got tired of hanging up my necktie at the same stop every night.
You what?
When I was 34, Captain Anderson, I had made my fortune, had retired with my wife and family to a beautiful home, to my friends. Not a worry in the world.
Yes?
Well, it started small, but it grew, this feeling. One night, I remember hanging up my necktie on the same stop as 100 nights before. And the fact that it was an expensive necktie didn't relieve the fact that I was doing nothing and going nowhere.
Where are you going now?
To Newfoundland, dragging a cable.
Not drag, Mr. Field. Please don't even mention dragging that cable.
You're a blasted fool, Cyrus.
Perhaps.
Probably lost all your money.
Good percentage of it is down with the lost cables. But when we finish laying this one, I'll be back in business.
What makes you think you can make it this time when you never made it before, Mr. Field?
I have made it before, Seth.
Don't think Seth was along on that trip, Cyrus.
Made it 7 years ago.
Does look like you would have heard about it, though, Seth. The people in America almost went crazy. Celebrations and bands and newspapers and people shouting and crying, comparing Mr. Field here to Christopher Columbus.
Well, I heard something about it.
Seth was probably drunk.
No, I remember. There was celebrating something in London once when my ship was in port. Something about a cable. I can't remember it very well.
Like Mr. Canning said, you were probably drunk.
No, I remember. The people were on the streets and everybody was yelling. I figured the Queen had a baby or something. I didn't know. Maybe it was Le Havre. Anyway, I think it was.
Listen.
What's the matter, Mr. Canning?
I thought I heard the machinery kick out upstairs.
Nonsense. You couldn't have heard it with all the noise.
I believe I'll go up on deck and check at any rate. Excuse me.
Of course.
Good night, Mr. Field.
Good night.
Believe I'll step out and take a look myself. Oh, he's got me all nervous. I'll finish supper sometimes later, Seth.
Aye, sir.
I'll see you later too, Cyrus.
All right, Captain.
Keep sober, Seth.
Don't worry about me, Captain Anderson. I hope you don't think I'm short of sense, Mr. Field, for getting that celebration. I was probably on a ship at the time.
It didn't last long anyway, Seth.
Thought they said 3 weeks.
Yes, but then the cable stopped working, so it was all a failure. I don't like to remember it.
Sorry to have brought it up.
It was like being on top of the world with your name in the history books. Then they knock you off. You feel foolish, as if you presume too much.
That was the first cable you tried, Mr. Field?
No, the third. The first cable broke after about 400 miles. So we had to raise more money. The second cable we tried to lay using 2 ships. They met in the middle of the ocean. There, each took half the cable, and one started toward Ireland, the other toward Newfoundland.
How did that work?
We started 3 times. First time they got about 3 miles. Second time they got about 40. The third time they got 200 before the cable broke. So we had to go back and raise some more money. Some of the stockholders wouldn't even come to the meeting. I don't like to remember that either.
No, sir.
The third cable we laid successfully, and the world went crazy. My wife and I were having the most wonderful time of our lives. I was back home. I was very happy. The president, the royal family, the governors, mayors. Then the cable stopped working. Then it started again. Then it stopped. Then it would start and stop and start and stop until I wanted to pull it up with my hands and choke it. And it stopped for good. So I started over. Raised $3 million, got another cable, got the Great Eastern, and here we are, sir.
Yes, sir.
I want some more coffee, sir.
Yes, sir.
That would be very kind of you. Hot coffee.
Yes, sir.
Great Eastern was the largest vessel in the world at that time, and to get a message from the testing room to Mr. Canning at the payout machinery, to Captain Alexander on the bridge, and then to the engine room took quite a while. But on the second day of the voyage, a message made that lengthy round, and the message was, "There's a fault in the cable. Stop engines and prepare to pull it back in." The cable was returned to the deck 1 nautical mile an hour. That's 1/3 the normal walking speed of a human being. The ship with her propellers and side wheels still was at the mercy of wind and the Atlantic, both of which were fortunately calm. After 2 hours of taking in cable, they cut it so that they might hook up their testing machinery to the island length and see if a proper signal was now possible. The cable was found to be still faulty, so the operation continued.
Oh, I've known cable to stop working for 2 hours. No one knew why, and then began again.
I see, Mr. Field.
Most likely it's some mistake on shore.
The take-up machinery is doing all right, except for the boilers, isn't it?
Yes, it's an improvement over the last 2 trips.
But I swear, Mr. Field, if we get this cable laid, I never want anybody to say cable to me again so long as I live. And if we don't get it laid, I certainly don't want anybody to say it.
At 2 a.m., the cable was cut again for a second test. It showed that the fault in the cable still lay between the vessel and the island station. The operation was resumed. As the cable came aboard, it was covered with a grayish coating of mud and ooze from the bed of the ocean. The men washed it off and examined the cable foot by foot. Back in Ireland, where the telegraph signal had suddenly stopped, engineers crowded around their equipment. Reporters for English and continental papers waited. Men who had their money invested in the cable stock fidgeted nervously and went without breakfast. Oh, there were some fine bargains in Atlantic cable stock that morning. As on deck, at 1/3 the speed of a human walk, the cable came back aboard, mile after mile. After dawn...
All right, stop the machinery. Secure the cable and cut it. Prepare it for another test.
The test proved the remaining cable was now sound. The engineers in Ireland breathed their weighty sigh of relief as the signal resumed. Reporters hurried to the nearby telegraph stations to wire their reports. Atlantic cable stock went up again. Then, but half an hour after the signal had resumed, it stopped.
If we only knew what was wrong with it or where the fault lay. I tell you, Mr. Field, some men are stupid, some men are smart. We have smart men aboard this ship, but every one of them is stupid. 1,600 miles to go and we can't get 50. With a calm sea and in a shallow part of the ocean.
A short time later, the cable again worked properly. No one knew why it had stopped. No one knew why it started again. But the Great Eastern began putting down cable once more. The fast hum of the cable running through the machinery was resumed. Mile after mile, at 6 nautical miles an hour, the Great Eastern put hours, then days behind her.
It's beautiful the way things are going, Mr. Field.
Oh, we'll be in Newfoundland without great delay. This machinery of yours is a marvel, Mr. Canning.
I believe it is. Why, with just a little luck...
We'll have the luck, don't worry.
But soon we'll get to the edge of the ocean bank, Mr. Field. The depth will drop there from 200 fathoms on down to 700, then to 1,700.
Never mind. Never mind, Mr. Canning.
Of course not, Mr. Field.
We'll pull into that little harbor in Newfoundland, never mind.
I agree with you.
Wonderful name for a harbor, you know.
What's its name?
Heart's Content.
Yes. Heart's Content. Newfoundland.
The actual journal of W.H. Russell, who was aboard, we take the following words.
July 27th. Morning broke on a bright, bounding sea and clear blue sky. From the testing room came gratifying reports of the improved insulation of the cable, which had been caused by the immersion of the cable in colder water. Many of the men are planning out journeys to the United States. Others speculate on the probability of sport in Newfoundland. July 28th. A night more of joyous progress. All going successfully. Not a hitch in cable, machinery, or ship. It is worthwhile to go aft and look at the cable. As every inch scanned by watchful eyes and noted in books, it flies through the whole apparatus, and then in a gentle curve skims the surface of the ocean more than 200 feet astern. Saturday, July 29th. Everything has gone on more admirably during the night. Heart's content on August 5th is certain. Noon, ship's time. Our position is latitude 52 degrees, 33 minutes, and 30 seconds. Longitude 27 degrees and 40 minutes. Water 2,000 fathoms, or 2 nautical miles. 1:10 p.m., ship's time. An ill-omened activity about the testing room, which has been visible for some time, reached its climax. The engines were slowed. In 5 minutes, the great ship was motionless. In an instant afterwards, everyone was on deck, and the evil tidings flew from lip to lip. Something was wrong with the cable again.
What's the pressure on the cable there?
2 tons, Mr. Cannon. Is that too much?
No, it should take more than that, according to the authorities. What are you thinking about, Mr. Field?
Why, at this spot, 7 years ago, Mr. Canning, we began the second attempt to lay an Atlantic cable.
7 years ago.
And believe it or not, it was on this same day.
Is that a fact? Well, now, that is a coincidence. Why do you do it, Cyrus? Why do you keep trying? The last time we had to stop and pick up cable, the fault was a piece of wire not an inch long, which had pierced the cable's insulation. After your years of planning, making preparations, a piece of wire not an inch long threatened the success of the whole thing. Why do you do it?
Because someday, Mr. Canning, I'm going to retire to New York or to Boston and join some important club. Get a chair by the fire. And when some young whippersnapper comes up to me and says, "Well, sir, and what do you do?" I want to say, "Well, young man, I haven't been doing much since I laid the Atlantic cable." I want to see his expression.
Cyrus, that's foolishness.
It's big, that's why. It's the biggest thing I've ever heard of. It's something my sons and grandsons can be proud of and point back to and say, "I'm Cyrus Field the 8th or the 9th. And people will look up and say, "I've heard the name." It's big, Mr. Canning. It's impossible.
So is the mountain big and some of them impossible?
Men climb mountains, don't they?
Of course they do, but only foolish ones.
No. Men are peculiar creatures. A lion, an elephant, they wouldn't climb a mountain just because it was big or somebody said it was impossible to do. But man would. Man likes to stand on the top of accomplishments and give his lion's roar. Look where I am. Look here, all you past generations of two-legged creatures, you crusaders and kings and squires and sea captains and mothers and artisans of 1,000 years ago. Look here. This is what you said a man could not do. It is done.
Cyrus, I don't care about the crusaders.
And also, they're the people 1,000 years ahead who will be striking at even greater accomplishments and tracing back their history. I will be a part of their history. They will say, and back here, in 1865, a group of men aboard a ship did the impossible and aided the progress of all mankind when they laid the Atlantic cable.
People dead and people unborn. I'm staying awake nights, am I?
Yes. And for yourself, Mr. Canning. For the faces of the people when you say, "Well, young man, I haven't done much since I laid the Atlantic cable."
9:30 p.m., ship's time. That part of the cable where the mischief lay was picked up. It was at once cut and reserved to be examined by Mr. Canning. The shore end was spliced and jointed to a fresh end of the cable from the after tank. These operations were finished before midnight, but it was not judged expedient to resume the process of paying out till the morning. As yet, no one knew the nature of the injury to the cable. No one could account for the hitch. but it certainly did not affect anyone's belief in success.
We've been a bit delayed, Cyrus, but we're about halfway, and with a little luck, they'll be calling you Christopher Columbus again. You'll be the toast of England and America again, Cyrus, with a little luck.
On the night of August 2nd, when the vessel was almost two-thirds of the way across, a gale rose from the westward. Then the wind shifted suddenly to the north-northwest. There was a deep fog. The sea was high. Depth of water was 2,000 fathoms. The word went from the test room to Mr. Canning to the captain to the engine room that there was a flaw in the cable, and the engines must be stopped.
My engine's gone. I can't hold it near the cable.
Can't be helped.
I can stand up there and twirl the pilot wheel and nothing happens.
Secure the cable and get her around to the take-up machinery in the bows.
Aye, sir.
We have to try, Captain. If we fail, cable till this blows over, we'll never get it back in.
We're too far along to lose her, Mr. Canning.
Good Lord, Captain Anderson. Do you think I don't know where we are?
In the salon of the vessel waited Cyrus Field. He was still sitting there much later when Captain Anderson and Mr. Canning came in and stood awkwardly nearby. They were drawn and tired. Salt water was on their faces and their clothing was wet. Mr. Canning nodded to Captain Anderson.
We lost her, Cyrus. She's broke. She's gone. In 2 miles of water, Mr. Field. She's gone.
We've told you a story of defeat, ladies and gentlemen, in order to tell you a greater story of victory. The victory belongs to Cyrus Field, who returned to England after this fourth failure and there once more raised the money needed, the $3 million needed for another cable. This new cable was put aboard the Great Eastern, which 1 year later lay off Valentia, Ireland, steam up and engine silent, her crewmen again expectant. On the ship, only one man moved confidently, a man with a beard. He stepped out of the main salon as if he hadn't a care in the world.
Coffee too cold, as usual, Seth.
Nobody can suit you with coffee, Mr. Field.
Good morning, sailors.
Morning, sir.
He was a well-known man, internationally famous for his failures. One of the most dedicated salesmen of all time. Cyrus, the great Cyrus, the American Cyrus Field, who on his 5th attempt laid the Atlantic cable.
American Adventure is written by John Ehle, directed by John Clayton, and is produced by the Communications Center of the University of North Carolina. The part of Cyrus Field was played by Fred Young. American Adventure is produced and recorded on the campus at Chapel Hill.